damn fine cup of coffee.
Welcome on in to your Midnight Book Club. Tonight, we continue our journey through American cosmic, UFOs, religion, and technology. Now, if you've been with me on the journey, we've already gone through a exploration of Silicon Valley with old Dr. Jacques Vallée right here. Then we ventured to the actual Roswell crash site from 1947 with a scientist who works with NASA who goes by the pseudonym Tyler D. We learned all about Tyler D and his special position at NASA, how he's had an experiment on a spaceship that's gone into space ever since the Challenger and before so. He talks about how he speaks with off-world intelligences to get the ideas for his experiments. Now, when they were in the desert at the Roswell crash site, DW Pasulka, our author here, she was with somebody named James, another pseudonym. Now, the scientists that DW works with in this book, who believe in UFOs, entities, and encounters, and actually encounter them themselves. Now, they go by pseudonyms like James in this chapter that we're going to read, and Tyler D in the previous chapter. DW gave him the name Tyler D because she felt he was like Tyler Durden from Fight Club. But, pretty cool. Now, James, another pseudonym, just the first name James, like a badass, like a really good singer. He was with DW at the Roswell crash site, and his deal was wanting to find a piece of the craft so he could prove that this was real. And guess what? They found one. Tyler D blindfolded them, took them out to the desert. The area that they were at that was outside of Roswell was covered with tin cans. Tin cans as far as the eye could see. Tyler said that this was one way that they cover up UFO crash sites was by spreading junk, aluminum cans. So they had specially tuned metal detectors that would only pick up on alien technology or the craft. James is another, we're going to learn about him, super famous, interesting scientist, has tons of patents that we use today. He's metal detecting, boop, he finds one, and they're like, oh, whoa, it's a piece. He takes it back, he analyzes it. He comes back to DW, our author, and says, well, it's either the world's most expensive prank, like billions of dollars to make this kind of material that doesn't exist yet, or it's off-world technology, thus proving Roswell once again. I don't know how much more proof we're going to need for Roswell. I mean, Unsolved Mysteries did a decent job. Again, kind of like a Mothman job. They do good, but they don't go into like the real history. Like they talked about cattle mutilations, but they don't talk to Linda Moulton Howe, who's like the expert on cattle mutilations. She cut her teeth on that subject back in the day. So it's kind of like whatever. But anywho, back to the subject at hand. James, master of the multiverse. So in this chapter, we're learning all about that scientist who really just wants to prove that the phenomena, and when we say the phenomena, we mean the UFO phenomenon, alien abductions, all that good stuff. That's what we're talking about. Chapter 2, James, master of the multiverse. And I love each chapter starts with a quote. This one's from Friedrich Nietzsche. If you've seen the movie, I'm sorry, I'm going to take the book cover off because I don't want to hurt it. I don't want to harm it during this filming. If you've seen that one movie with the bug and Steve Carell, you know what I'm talking about. He researched Friedrich Nietzsche. Anywho, this quote's from that philosopher. Do you believe then that the science would have arisen and grown if the sorcerers, alchemists, astrologers, and witches had not been their forerunners? Friedrich Nietzsche, right? And that lines up with the classic quote about any technology, any advanced enough technology will seem like magic until we understand it. Kind of the same deal. It reminds me of a really great book we have here. This is a classic of research right here. This is a classic of academic research into witchcraft and demonology. We'll be reading from this October, the spooky season, of course. But yeah, basically the witches from here who were persecuted and murdered during the Inquisition and during the years of the witch trial, rest in peace, they, advanced science a lot in a lot of ways that we don't know about. So we'll get into that in October, though. But I love that quote from Frederick because it highlights that lost history of renegade thinkers who lost their lives because they were just out on the edge trying herbs out and dancing around at night. That is the history of witchcraft and demonology. Very interesting. Wild times back then. But fuck that. Let's learn about the scientists we're trying to read about. James, master of the multiverse. A contented chihuahua lolled on James's lap as we spoke about our trip to the site scheduled for the morning. James and I drank beer and Tyler sipped water. The sun had set and the sky turned an icy blue color as the full moon slowly rose, its beams reflecting off the white desert sand. This eerie, beautiful setting cast a spell on me. The rainbow that had greeted us upon our arrival seemed like a gate of colored light through which I had entered into a part of the country that was somehow more alive than North Carolina, where I lived. I had the uncanny feeling that the place was somehow conscious and that I was there. I consider belief in the phenomena, UFOs and aliens and shit, to be an IQ test, James explained as he stroked the little dog's tan fur. Oh my God, that's like my little Spike. Ooh. If a person cannot fathom the possibility, as far as I'm concerned, they haven't passed the test. Ooh, yes. If you're listening to me, that means we passed the test. Old James here means that we passed his IQ test. Congrats, everybody. They're not smart enough, and I don't want to talk to them about this subject area. I consider their minds closed, he said. This was typical of the James I had come to know. To say he didn't suffer fools gladly would be an understatement. He eviscerated them, took them apart limb by limb with the sword of intellect. I had witnessed this on several occasions. The victims were always worthy opponents, such as the top scholars from universities like Princeton. I felt bad for them because James usually humiliated them beyond the point where he had won the argument. Ooh, yes, this guy sounds great. But I also understood his motivation. He had certain members of his extended family were lifelong experiencers. Oh, he interacted with the phenomenon on a personal and professional basis. He saw the best and he was experienced with the worst of it. His dismissal of and scorn towards those who didn't believe was personal. Yes. James is like, okay, this is going to be weird, so don't hate me. But James is like St. Michael. He's got the flaming sword. He's got the flaming sword of belief, and he's slashing through him. He was also protective of many others he knew who were actively and sometimes brutally victimized for their belief. Critically, his own belief was forged in the crucible of evidence. As much as I was intimidated by James's intelligence and passion, I saw him as a hero. He had the guts and ability to take on anyone in the world who dismissed the reality of the phenomena, UFOs and shit. He fought the good fight for the right reason because he believes, or as he would say, because he knows. Ooh, what does he know? Oh, sorry. Sorry, cramped desk. Sometimes when your elbow hits something, it's like, whoa. But James knows. The factoid here that we want to focus on is his family has been lifelong experiencers, which tracks. In Dr. Mack's book, Abduction, same thing. Families often have encounters generationally. If you have had a encounter with an entity, especially like a classic alien abduction type encounter, dollars to donuts, someone in your family or your bloodline has had that same kind of encounter at some point. Now, where the fuck was I? Oh, yeah. Meeting James. So we learned about meeting Tyler D in the first chapter. Now we're going to learn about meeting her research partner, James, who we don't know the name of. I think he came forward in encounters where we learn his identity. I just can't remember it. But James, because he ends up coming forward because he wants people to believe. This is the moment, like this is our time to accept these things because they're real. Meeting James. James was the first scientist I met who was also out, quote unquote, as an experiencer. He was also in a rare category of as an academic who studied the phenomena. My colleague and I had heard that he might be interested in attending a small get-together of like-minded colleagues. Meeting of the minds. We did some background research on him. What we found blew our minds. He held an endowed chair of molecular biology and headed a laboratory at one of the top universities in the world. He was a successful inventor. He had a global reputation for pushing the boundaries of science and biotechnology. In our correspondence with him, we were astonished by his openness. He was very transparent about his interest in the phenomenon, UFOs and shit. And he seemed, at least in email, devoid of pretension. He was a top dog, but acted like a regular guy. I liked him already. Okay, so that's great. I mean, we love a humble king, right? But what is interesting here is when he talks about... Okay, no, what I wanted to talk about, sorry, not something he says. The phenomenon, how they refer to this phenomenon, and I'm like, because UFOs, that's what they're saying. These scientists are so classy about the weird things they believe in. They just call it the phenomenon. Because honestly, I mean, I guess that's the most honest way to put it, because we really don't know what it is. Anyone trying to sell you that they know what it is bullshitting you. All we could really do is accept that it's here, I feel. But I mean, I don't know. I don't fucking know. Maybe someone does know. Who knows? Anywho. But old Jimmy here. Oh, yeah. Sorry. I was like, what are we talking about? Old Jimmy, humble king. How we first met him. Oh, yeah. And I was just mentioning the phenomenon. So whenever you hear me say the phenomenon, they're talking about UFOs. They're talking about weird stuff. Aliens, entities, you name it. They're talking about it. Which, by the way, I will say, in a previous... Read Aloud Midnight Book Club, I criticized Unsolved Mysteries for not having enough weird episodes. I feel like Robert Stack always made sure there was a good mix of murders and really weird mysteries. This new batch is mostly weird ones. There's one murder, which is sad and weird, and I really hope that there's some tips out there, because the old Unsolved Mysteries was really good at like solving shit. So I hope this one is too. So I hope that murder gets solved. But the other 3 episodes are all weird, wacky, wild ones. So they're worth checking out. Because everything they go over is a real phenomenon. But back to James. We like him because he's a regular humble king. I first met him in person at our summer conference in the foothills of Northern California. The tastes of professors tend toward the conservative and economical. So it was startling to see a high-end roadster tricked out with a red leather interior, pull up outside a small hotel where we were to meet. A group of us were standing nearby and silence fell over us as we watched the car park. Oh, it was so cool. Out popped James, sneakers and all. He apologized for being late. The style of his entrance, probably typical of Silicon Valley millionaires, presaged our introduction to James and his extraordinary work. It proved to be a wild ride. That is a word I've never even seen before. Presaged. I don't even know what it means. I feel like it means It like overrided everything. It was the thing that set the tone for meeting this scientist, the master of the multiverse. So is he like Doctor Strange? Those are the vibes I'm getting. I feel like we're gonna meet the real life Doctor. Sorry, my elbow hit something. I have all my markers for art stuff right next to me. My elbow hits it, and it's like, oh god, what happened? Anywho, we're about to meet the real life Doctor Strange. This is who this is. That's who James is. Old Jimmy. James experiences as a youth. Every scientist we've talked to in DW's books has a history of weird sightings, whether it be lights in the sky or encounters with creatures running by or entities in their rooms. It's like a lifelong interest in it. At dinner that evening, I made sure to sit next to James. I offered him some wine, and he related his experiences with the phenomenon, UFOs, which began in his childhood. When he was 5 or 6 years old, he recalled little people that would appear in his room. Ooh, they stood by his bed or looked at him through his bedroom windows. He insisted that he was awake when these events took place, and he said emphatically, I was not asleep. Oh, and I was paralyzed, which tracks with every abduction story that we've read. He complained to his parents, who told him that he had some bad dreams, yet he told me that he knew that these night visitors were real. Later, as a young teenager, he had a strange encounter while delivering newspapers on a paper route. One of his customers, Mr. Jameson, demanded that his paper be delivered by 5:30 a.m. every morning. If James didn't make it in time, he might lose his route. One morning, as he frantically pushed himself towards Jameson's house, God damn it, Jameson, isn't that... That's not the name of the editor for Spider-Man, right? Peter Parker? Is that the name of the actor who plays him in... Why is Jameson in my head? But Jesus Christ, Jameson, you're an asshole. Don't make him get there by 5:30 every morning. I love thinking of James. Well, here, maybe Jameson is like, has a super stressful job, and he needs to know the news before he goes into his job, because maybe his boss is like, God damn it, Jameson, what's the news? And if he doesn't have the news, he's fired. You know, maybe that's why he needs it. He realized he wasn't going to make it in time. He sometimes took a shortcut through the woods, though he had always felt apprehensive about the area. But he was already late, so he had to use the shortcut. Have you ever felt apprehensive about an area? Let me know. As he entered the forest, things just didn't feel normal. A shapeless formation of light slowly passed over him, just above the treetops. It was about 20 feet across and completely soundless. He felt frozen in a time warp of light, bright as the sun, with no apparent source except itself. James just stood and watched in awe. It came and went in less than 10 seconds. James kept his paper route, but from this point onward, he completely avoided those woods. Good idea, Jimmy. Nothing happened again until he was in his 30s. One night, he woke up from a sound sleep and saw a tall, thin presence, at the end of his bed. It was smoky and translucent. He did not feel afraid, even though he was again paralyzed. In his head, he heard the words, "Go to sleep." And he did. My wife got me this wonderful beard comb. Need to use it. Helps you calm down when you're reading really crazy stuff, you know? So this is rocking my world right now. See, perfect. I've put down my sweatshirt here. So now Mewtwo has a little spot to go to. Oh, don't you? Okay. Gosh. Okay, so he's surrounded by beings in his 30s. He hears the words "go to sleep" in his head, and he does so. Which reminds me, I've been forgetting to do this, but it still stands always. If you've had any sort of encounter that you want to talk about, just say it in the chat however you want to, whisper it to me. Whatever it is, you just want to get it off your chest, please let me know. I've never had an encounter of such, but I'm a believer. I mean, I believe in it all. I would love to hear your story because, as always,
we're ready to believe you.
Absolutely. Because I don't know at all. From things I've read, I can only imagine how hard it is to have some sort of horrifying or life-changing experience and not be able to share it with anybody for fear of like ridicule or losing your job or whatever it may be. But back to James, who seems to have those exact kind of experiences. And this dude is a top-level scientist. Again, like, it's out there. We are in the time period where it's time to just open our minds and start believing in shit. I don't know. Or maybe not. Huh. What do we do? Okay. When he had arrived at our small hotel, the room James was given had a window that wouldn't close all the way, and there were no shades. He made it clear to the proprietor that this was unacceptable. Later, I realized that James had developed a fear of open windows in childhood, and it was now a compulsion. He needed to close the windows and cover them up with curtains. A close relative, he said, suffers from the same fear. You've seen shit then. Once, as a teenager, James pranked his relative by drawing a picture of a scary face and posting it on her window. The prank went very wrong. Upon seeing the face, the girl turned white and asked James, "How did you know?" For years afterwards, he wondered about her reaction. Oh, God. After the incident with the presence in his bedroom, a chance occurrence opened James to the possibility that his experiences were related to UFO phenomena. An avid reader of science fiction, James picked up a book by Harvard researcher John Mack. Woohoo! Yes! Oh my gosh, this gets me too excited. Yes, here it is right here. Oh yeah. Oh yeah. Oh, what's the stretch? Okay, this is the book right here. We have it. I love learning that other folks also picked up these books on their journey. We're all on the same journey, aren't we? Ooh, it is 69 degrees where I'm at right now. Yes, please. So Abduction. He picked up Abduction by John Mack. So this must have been huge because all the encounters he was having as a kid and as a teen or whatever have happened to thousands of people. Abduction. Human encounters with aliens. James at first thought the book was fiction. He was shocked by what he read. The experiences of Mack's subjects were exactly like his own. They described night visitors who paralyzed them and seemed to watch them in their sleep. The beings also spoke to the subjects telepathically. Mack had gained notoriety for his claim that experiencers were psychologically healthy and that experiences they described were common. He saw this as a significant cultural development that demanded serious scholarly attention. By the end of the book, James realized that he was reading what amounted to the story of his life. And after he found this out, his research took a whole new direction. James knew that he had to embark on a research direction that had no path, no predecessors, no mentors. Luckily, he was already distinguished for this style of research. His colleagues would scoff at the seemingly impossible ideas and hypotheses he proposed at conferences. He's just like Tyler D. We learned, then this is the most interesting story. I love this story about Tyler D., the scientist we learned about in chapter 1. He works for NASA. So his job is to put experiments on the spacecraft that are going to help humanity, right? He had an idea for an experiment that uncharged material. I don't know what this fucking means. Okay, so just. But that uncharged material could talk to charged material. And that was like a revolutionary idea. Everyone thought it was stupid. There was one professor who agreed to do this experiment in space because you needed... Tyler doesn't have a PhD. He talks to off-world entities and they give him these experiments, but he doesn't have a PhD. So he's not qualified to run the experiments in space. Now, that means he needs professors to do it. So he gets a professor who's like, okay, you know, I need to publish a paper about this shit. So yeah, I'll do this experiment. They go up in space. No one thinks this is going to fucking work but Tyler. Tyler's like, I know it's going to work because my experiments are memories. That's how he remembers everything that he works on. It's a memory. And he has like over 40 biomedical patents that like help us daily. All those experiments, he says they're memories to him. So he's like, I know this is going to work because it's memory. They go up in space. It works. Afterwards, he thinks he's going to get like accolades. They're like, oh, dude, you're called to Washington, D.C. They want to talk about the experiment that happened on the latest space shuttle. He's like, fuck yeah, dude, we're about to get accolades. What happens next is that he gets there and they're like, hey, you need to go to the basement. And Tyler's like, it's never good when they tell you need to go to the basement. So he's in the basement, and who joins him is the professor who did the experiment, along with witnesses who saw it. A general man walks in. He's like, who's the fucking dumbass who did this experiment? And Tyler's like, it was me, sir. It was my idea. He's like, how do you know? Why'd you do this? Like, how'd you know it? And Tyler's like, it was a memory. And I guess it takes him a while to explain this to the general. Then the general, but in Tyler's words, basically accepts that Tyler's a dumbass and decides to like back off. And that's the whole deal. That's what drives Tyler to leave NASA the first time. He leaves, and that's when he ends up doing all this biomedical stuff, which is awesome. Now he's back working with NASA. And that's his chapter. But you could check out the read-through on that. But anywho, that just reminds me, it's like the exact same as James, right? No one thinks these wild ideas are going to work, but guess what? They do. Everyone scoffs, but it real. At the seemingly impossible ideas and hypotheses that he proposed at conferences. But then he would leave them in the dust in the lab and make his ideas real. James was already a pioneer. On the agenda now was a new research direction in which he would grapple with his past and with one of the most significant questions in human history. In fact, at this stage in his life, there was no other agenda. Although he kept up with his day job obligations and grant proposals, the new agenda would dominate his life and seep into every aspect of his thought process. James surveyed his colleagues. He didn't know anyone who was an experiencer, nor was he acquainted with Jacques Vallée or anyone else who studied the phenomenon scientifically. Yeah, if he was, he would feel a lot more comfortable telling his story. All good science is done within communities of peer review and analysis. So James knew he needed to find like-minded researchers, but where? This was a field in which he knew no one. He came up with a daring plan. He decided to put himself on the map, to out himself publicly. Very important. As being interested in the phenomenon, UFOs. He began by researching about a spectacular case, some recently found material that was claimed to be of alien origin. James said that he could determine the truth of this claim. His plan proved to be a good idea and a bad idea. Ooh, gotta love those good and bad ideas. Any serious researcher of UFO phenomena is aware that many governments have engaged in programs of perception management. There are good reasons for this having to do with national security. Sighting events could have to do with another government's military program. Or, if the strange crafts are really from off-Earth, they might be hostile, or most likely governments do not want to cause alarm and they just don't know what the UFOs are. In the words of the philosopher Ludwig Wittgenstein, whereof one cannot speak, thereof one must be silent. Oh, wouldn't that be nice? Whereof one cannot speak, one must be silent. I mean, I know, does that apply to me? But I guess I'm reading books, so I'm reading, well, who knows? Ludwig, does that apply to me? Can you tell me, please? Oh, God. In any case, there is an exhaustively documented history of perception management. Declassified documents reveal that governments, including the United Kingdom and the United States, have often covered up and managed information about reported UFO events. One of the most famous instances can be found in what is known as the Durant Report. Oh. An account of the proceedings of the 1953 Robertson Panel, a U.S. government committee convened on the study of UFOs. Although the committee concluded that UFOs in and of themselves did not represent a security risk, they recommended a project of perception management that they termed training and debunking. What the fuck? A mass media education campaign enacted with the help of academics and the media moguls to control public knowledge about UFOs. It's everything we talk about. Wow. I should have read this book earlier. Oh, that's beautiful. So the Durant Report, folks. Check it out. The report concludes, the education could be accomplished by mass media such as television, motion pictures, and popular articles. Bases of such education would be actual case histories which had been puzzling at first but later explained. The John Handy Company, which made World War II training films, motion picture, and slide strips, was also suggested, as well as Walt Disney Incorporated. Animated cartoons. It was believed that business clubs, high schools, colleges, and television stations would all be pleased to cooperate in showing the documentary type of motion pictures it prepared in an interesting manner. So, folks, I mean, it's just like what Jacques Vallée talks about. Disclosure's never going to come from the government. They're never going to tell us what's up. I don't think that's ever going to happen. I know I'm a dumbass. I don't know jack about fart, but I feel that we're never going to get disclosure. We have to make that happen ourselves. By believing people, by believing good folks who have encounters. What this means is that the phenomenon, UFOs, is usually portrayed inaccurately, either intentionally by government sources or unintentionally by producers and directors creating products to appeal to consumer tastes. A great documentary about this, about agents inside the UFO community, is called Mirage Men. Very dope. Check it out. Only serious researchers know this. Everyone else, for the most part, assumes that what they see on television, in documentaries, or in the newspapers is being reported accurately. James, a top researcher in the hard sciences but not in UFO phenomena, reached out to several public ufologists, one of whom claimed to have access to an artifact that some claimed was supposedly not of this earth, or at least not understood in accepted science. James knew that if he gained access to this artifact, he would be able to analyze it and determine its origin. He also knew that his involvement would be publicized and attract the attention of people who might be serious researchers. His ultimate goal was to meet them. James contacted the ufologists, and they agreed to let him examine the artifact. It certainly looked anomalous, and it had features that were not readily explainable. The ufologists would include James's research in a documentary watched by millions of people. James would conduct the experiments at his university in his spare time, and the ufologists would film him and report his findings, whatever they might be. Advertisements and media about the documentary hyped his participation, and suggested that the findings would change science. James, however, had only said that he would ascertain whether the artifact was from Earth or elsewhere. He did not assume that it was of alien origin, but he did want to know what caused it to have such anomalous features. At one point during the experimentation, James became convinced that the specimen was assuredly from Earth. Using the tools of his trade, the data pointed strongly that it was of human origin. His conclusions seemed lost on audiences. However, and even on several ufologists with whom he was working, media focused on the artifact as having non-human alien origin. The public thought James had confirmed that it was alien. The media pronouncements on James's research were so confusing that he decided to work with a few credible high-profile science publications and newspapers to make a more direct statement on the matter. These publications affirmed that James had debunked the claim that the artifact had an alien origin and emphasized that he had in fact found it to be in human origin. Yet, even this well-meant attempt to correct the story missed the point. Yeah, woo! I mean, you just gotta know. It's just a great story about, like, it doesn't matter. You could tell your truth and it's just gonna be interpreted and then it's gone. And then you try to tell it in a different way and it doesn't work. Everyone's like, no. We already know. Which is interesting because James is also a believer. So the fact that he was trying to debunk something that wasn't real, which is awesome. We gotta sift through that shit if we're really gonna prove it to folks. The fact that he was trying to debunk something that was not real, and then people just thought he was saying it was real. I don't know. What is that? Is that irony? What is that? I'm too stupid to know. James is a scientist. He used his skills to show that something that appeared anomalous could be understood within the parameters of natural processes. He ruled out that the artifact was from elsewhere. It could be understood by conventional science. That did not mean that he ruled out the reality of the phenomena of UFOs. That phenomena he believed was very real. This artifact was not an example of it. And that's like the hardest thing, right? Finding the actual proof that we could all walk with. You know, for me, I'm like, I hear your story, I believe you. But most people, it will boil down to they'll be like, you know, because the powers that be have done a really good job of explaining things away as like swamp gas, hallucinations, mass hysteria. You know, if you're at all under the influence of anything, people are just like, oh, you're hallucinating. Even if the thing you were under the influence of doesn't cause that sort of thing ever. So, I don't know. Take that for what you will. But old Jimmy, I completely believe. And that's what the tough thing is, right? He's trying to find the proof. Then he finds something that's not real, and everyone's like, oh, he's saying it's real. But he's like, no, it's not. He's screaming at us. The visit. James's reason for affiliating with the more public ufologists was to achieve a goal to meet serious researchers of the phenomena, UFOs, so he could carry on with his new research agenda. He needed a community of researchers who played by the rules of science and peer review. Soon after the much publicized event, he met with success. The serious researchers actually came to him, but his introduction to them was extraordinary and frightening. Ooh! Well, who are the serious researchers, Kitty? The title of the television series, Punked, had become a part of everyday ordinary vocabulary. Being punked by one's friends meant that one was the butt of a practical joke, while simultaneously being filmed and even streamed in real time online, or worse, on television. It was to some an honorary humiliation. James, who lived in a university town, was aware of the show and had seen a few of his friends get punked. When the men in black suits knocked on James's office door, he opened it and stared into two very grim, unhappy faces. What? Oh, money. The men in black come and visit James because he's researching UFOs, and then he thinks it's a joke. Oh no. Oh no. Who are these people, he wondered. The men asked if they could come in and talk to him about the artifact and other things. James wondered, what have I gotten myself into this time? He invited them into his office, and they accepted the invitation, not saying another word. The silence felt to James like a vague sort of threat. He made a joke to lighten the mood, but the men did not respond. After James offered some water, he decided that he would match their cold demeanor. Amen. Yeah, meet sassy with sassy, dude. That's what you got to do. Which reminds me, the newest edition of Unsolved Mysteries on Netflix with the Roswell episode, they talked to a woman who was 12 at the time of Roswell, and she experiences government men just like this, who basically threaten her life and are telling her, you did not see the material. And she's like, yeah, I did. I saw the UFO stuff. And they're like, no, you did not. We could take you out in the desert and make you disappear. And it traumatizes her for life, so she doesn't even talk about the incident till she's much, much, much advanced in age. It's interesting. It's worth a check out. Roswell, real, happened, definitely, 100%. Okay, where'd I go? Okay, he's sassying. He's trying to out-sassy the men in black, which honestly is never a good idea. What is it that you mean, that you want, he asked. We want to know what you really found out about the artifact. I already stated many times I can't find any evidence that it's of alien origin. We already know that. We want to know why you got involved and what else you might know. After a moment passed, James came to the conclusion that he was most likely being punked. Amused and ready for the charade to be revealed, he looked around for evidence of a camera or film crew. There was none. With neither side knowing exactly what the other knew, there ensued one of the most interesting conversations of James's life. One of the men turned out to be like him, a top researcher at one of the world's most renowned universities, but with a long association with the intelligence agencies, CIA and shit. The other man was with a large aerospace firm, Boeing, stuff like that. What started as a disturbing encounter became a meeting of the minds. Ooh, a meeting of the UFO minds. That's where you want to be, where these like science guys are talking about what they know about off-world intelligences. The two visitors seemed grim and serious, primarily because their own research into the phenomena, UFOs, had proved to be very disturbing. Ooh, God. They dealt with radiation effects and other biological interactions of the phenomena with humans, a subject of which James knew nothing. As they talked, he realized that the serious researchers he'd been looking for had arrived. And they weren't who he had thought they would be. Instead, they were very much like him and not public ufologists. They were not the men in black. Okay, well, that's good. They weren't interested in publicity, but they were very interested in helping people who needed help. Over the next several months, his two fully human visitors exposed him to a non-traditional path that was as much a science as what he practiced at his quote-unquote day job. James had found his peers. James related his story to the experience of the men in black over wine at a conference dinner. I was riveted. He explained, I have seen things that our current theories of science cannot explain, yet the evidence for them is very real. As real as anything that the current theories support. I tend not to throw out evidence, even if it doesn't fit. In fact, I think what has made me successful in this very strategy to not ignore what doesn't fit, what doesn't make sense. What doesn't make sense? That type of evidence, the type that causes researchers to scratch their heads, is the type that is the most attractive to me and what has taught me the most. So I know we are not alone. There is something here. What does it want? Is it studying us? I don't know, but it is here. There is no doubt in my mind. Ooh, the aliens are here. They're here. You heard it from Jimmy. Jimmy just told us. Now we're going to get to know Jimmy the scientist. So he finally found his peers. Now he's actually going to be working with them. And I'm excited to find out what they find out. So strap in. We got a bit left in this big old chapter here on Jimmy, master of the multiverse. James gave his presentation to our little group the next day. We filed into a small conference hall, which was lit by beams of warm sunshine that streamed through its tall windows. We filled our small white coffee cups and settled into our chairs. James was ready with his computer. We made ourselves comfortable and prepared to hear the young scientist who had arrived so flashy in his high-end chariot. As James unveiled his first slide, we all squinted to decipher the object pictured. None of us recognized what it was. It turned out to be a photo of a massive molecular microscope, something that none of us had ever seen before, and probably would never see again. It was giant, like no microscope I had ever seen. It looked like a big, shiny hospital CAT scanner, CAT scanner. James's lab had built it. From that point onward, we all knew that what we were witnessing, a level of research that was beyond anything we had seen before. I wondered where this presentation could possibly go from here. Each one of us had studied the phenomenon, UFOs, and was well acquainted with the relevant case studies, which were of individual sightings or a flap. A flap is a high level of UFOs, a series of UFO sightings by several individuals, and even groups of individuals over a span of a few days. These case studies provided evidence of an aerial phenomenon that was anomalous. Anomalous, quote unquote, was the word indicating that we had ruled out its being a known artifact or drones or blimps, that it was not attributable to military exercises, and that it often left physical traces, such as burn marks on objects or grasses or people. Several of us had already presented case studies from the historical record that appeared to correlate with the modern cases. It was clear that there was a range of beliefs among the attendees. Several presenters were of the opinion that the phenomenon, UFOs, were psychological and that it involved imaginary projections by people or groups of people onto unexplained external stimuli. An example of this could be that a group of people spotted a blimp and they mistook it for a UFO. And due to their specific group dynamic, they projected it onto the interpretation that it was a hostile alien aircraft. The presentations made in this spirit were convincing. Other presenters were convinced that the phenomenon, UFOs, was a form of non-human intelligence that wasn't necessarily extraterrestrial. It may be interdimensional or coexisting within our own universe, though in a different frequency. These presentations were just as compelling. The questions we had been pondering were all over the map. Was the phenomenon something that arose within a social imagery, or was it a secret advanced military craft? Was it truly something non-human? We were all academics, and even though we were researching something that was considered to be on the fringe, we were well trained to follow the conventions of our respective disciplines. The standard baseline from which we all functioned was pretty conservative. Unless we had proof that it was non-human, we would refrain from advocating that hypothesis. Which is like, they're very serious about this. They're like making sure that if we're going to say something's non-human, we got to have some sort of good evidence for it, so we could trust what's coming next. which we have talked about mass hysteria here before. When we read about the cryptid, the Mad Gasser, that could be a case of mass hysteria. Although there were several cases of Mad Gasser attacks before everyone started reporting this blue gas. But I do like how DW mentions both cases are just as compelling. To me, that just says they're both true. There are some cases that it is a projected interpretation of something. It's not really even a craft, but people think it's a craft. So then everyone thinks it's a craft because we're all connected in the consciousness in that way. But I also think that it could be extraterrestrial, off-planet, or interdimensional as well. I honestly think it's all happening at once. I think it's all real. I think all explanations find their way in somehow. But I mean, I don't know fart about poop, so. Anywho. The standard baseline from which we all functioned was pretty conservative. Unless we had proof that it was non-human, we would refrain from advocating that hypothesis. Like a gust of fresh air, James's opening statements completely and unequivocally transcended our stoic provincialism. As we examined his pictures of the microscope and sipped our coffee, he blindsided us with this assertion. We will start by stating that the phenomenon commonly referred to as UFOs exists. The evidence supports that there is a phenomenon. It interacts with humans, but we cannot as yet explain it. However, we can identify its effects on humans in the physical channels of communications through which it operates. Through studying its modes of interaction with us, we can gain considerable knowledge about it. This claim caused the hairs on our well-trained academic necks to rise. We were now wide awake, and not because of the coffee. To scientifically capture all these experiences or events, argued James, the people predisposed to having them, that is, to being contacted by non-human intelligence, must be studied. The literature shows that contact manifests as anomalous experiences, as telepathic communication with aerial objects, UFOs, and beings, or as anomalous cognition, knowledge of future events, or other knowledge of which there is no conventional explanation. It also manifests as random sightings or aerial phenomenon that sometimes interact with witnesses through such things as beams of light. The Bible and records of Catholic history and other religious histories are replete with accounts of such events. Again, historical precedent for it. It's not just a modern event. It's not just something that happens in the United States. It's been happening all over the world for millennia. James's own experiences and those he had recently learned about from his relatives informed his theory, but he had also studied others who reported them. As a scientist, he was aware of two things, one explainable and the other not. His research found that some people exhibited knowledge of events for which they should not, according to what we know about normal processes of acquiring information. He cannot explain this, but he relied on quantum theory to suggest that particles distant from each other seem to have knowledge of each other and even affect each other. Spooky action at a distance. Ooh, we love spooky action. This is what remote viewing is all about. This is why we could remote view as humans. Spooky action, baby. And scientists don't know why this is so. He suggested that perhaps there is a quantum field of information, and somehow his subjects tapped into it. He theorized that the ability to contact or be contacted is likely to be genetically determined, since genes define structures and architectures of the tissues of the body. Genes would underlie the components of a brain receiver for such information, he said. He said, once the phenomenon contacts humans, from wherever it originates, it leaves a signature. That signature is traceable. It is physical or physiological. It is processed then in a world that tools of science can study. We can identify it. James speculated that once the information is received by the brain and recognition occurs, it likely creates changes in human physiology. Somewhere a neuroelectrical channel is modified, and the signal enters a world that scientists can access. That means researchers can identify the most obvious changes and trace them back to their molecular roots. He explained that because form and function are linked in biology, the function of the brain has strong genetic components driven by the architecture of the neurons, as defined in the genetic interaction set in a given individual. Genetics, by definition, is familial, and experiencers of the phenomenon often run in families like his. Just like in Abduction. The scientists are reading about now, James, when he picked up this book, Abduction, he felt validated because he learned that hundreds and thousands of people have these same experiences. And they all run in the family. Dollars to donuts. If you've had a strange experience with the unknown, someone in your family history has also had an experience. Genetics are tuned in that way, according to Jimmy. Allegedly. James's presentation was fascinating and intensely personal. He revealed that he knew some people who were believed by the contact events. Does that mean they turned believers because of contact events? Contact was not always welcome. I listened carefully to the words James chose. Bedeviled was used more than any other word in this context. But other words were harassed, bothered. Bedevil means to torment or harass maliciously or diabolically. Ooh, yeah. That's how the gray man feels too. He hates when the gray aliens visit him. He feels bedeviled by them. Fucking interesting. And talking about the word bedeviled, so they really do feel bothered by this. It's like the story of Mullis here. Nobel Prize winning molecular scientist Kary Mullis has an encounter with an electric raccoon. It drives him a little nuts. He goes to the tree where he has the encounter and he shoots it up. It just kind of pisses men of science off or people of science off, because you lose control for that moment. You have no control over your body when the grays come to bedevil you. It became clear to me, if not to the other attendees, that James's mission was personal and it was heroic. He was out to develop a medicine, an antidote to the malicious contact event. James was incensed that contact took place on their terms and not on ours. James's plan was to shift the relationship by 180 degrees. He wanted to give humans the right and the ability to say no, hell yeah. As the day progressed, I began to wonder whether this was now James's primary life mission. It was no wonder what he would not tolerate equivocation with respect to the reality of the phenomenon, UFOs. To say it wasn't real was to discount James on several levels. Intellectually, certainly. But more personally, it discounted the suffering certain experiencers endured, some their whole lives. And that's true. When we read Abduction, it's horrifying what people have to experience at the hands of the entities. When James ended his presentation, a silence filled the room. I imagine that others had many questions, and had as many questions as I did, but were still formulating them. Or maybe they were too shocked to speak. In any case, a colleague finally ventured a question that I shared, which had to do with quantum theory and James's idea of the field of information. At what point does the anomalous phenomena come into contact with human hardware? James repeated the question in his answer. Basically, it appears that anomalous cognition starts on a level that is beyond the physical world. Yeah, it's above our consciousness. It's in another dimension. Like we've been reading about, like we talked about in, like Itzhak Bentov talked about in The Mechanics of Consciousness. A level beyond the physical world of which we are aware. I suggest it's on some quantum level. Humans use their senses to interact with energy forms like light. Modern physics reveals that at these well-understood physical levels, quantum information is transferred. However, Once an individual becomes aware of an anomalous event or knowledge, it has at that point already been transferred into human brains as a recognition via mainstream physiology, namely human neuronal hardware. So let's identify where this information is transferred and identify what types of molecules are involved in this process. This allows us to begin the long road towards identifying the human interface that is our connection to the phenomenon, UFOs and aliens. I can use cutting-edge approaches to locate these molecules and identify signatures of interaction, he continued. This is the same kind of science that drives biomedical research in our world today. Just as certain intellectual traits are heritable because of how the brain is wired, it should be assumed that so is the ability to interface with the phenomenon, UFOs. Therefore, it would be a good idea to locate families where the trait is dominant. It is assuredly a sixth sense that is associated with a material component we already possess. As James was speaking, I thought about my own family. A cousin in law enforcement has always possessed what I believe would conform to James's definition of anomalous cognition. His abilities have helped him out in many dire situations, where his life or the lives of others were in danger. Oh, and this reminds me of the late, great Pat Price, a great American hero in psychics. He was a sheriff who always felt he was able to just solve crimes. He would show up at a place and he was able to figure it out. And his hunches were always fucking correct. He ended up working with Harold Putoff and Russell Targ at the SRI, the Stanford Research Institute, infamous for research into psychic abilities, proving that they're real. He was their top guy. He ended up working for the government, was heavily involved in Cold War remote viewing. He ends up dying of a heart attack, some say rather mysteriously. Others might point to psychic programs, maybe a Cold War psychic on the other side was able to zap him, who knows? But great American hero, great hero of the weird, an honest American who was able to access the unknown in a very, very powerful way. Check out Mind Reach. I have a read aloud about him too on my old YouTube. Check that out if you're interested. But super dope dude. Super dope unknown hero of American history. But that's cool that old DW, the author, has someone similar in her family who uses their hunches to survive and thrive as a law enforcement officer. One of my students, Jose, a Marine, an author who has seen active duty, wrote about it in his book, about his experiences on the front line. I always found it fascinating when seniors in the Marines would say, your point man, if he has a knack for finding IEDs, improvised explosive devices, or sensing things, keep him there. And we always did, even amongst one another. In training, they called it atmospherics, but observing the physical components of your surroundings was always secondary, even tertiary. It was pragmatism, not just simple belief, that determined whether or not the sense existed. When your life or the life of your friend is on the line, you're not about to argue metaphysics. If the sense works, then use it. And that reminds me of Jack Parsons, his rituals, and the gray man in Encounters. If it's not working, someone who's very logical, a scientist or a soldier on the front line, isn't going to use it. So if the sense is working, if you got your man who could kind of see the future and knows where the explosives are, you fucking keep him there because it's working. The sense existed for James because he had evidence of it. He had been exposed to communities of people who displayed anomalous cognition, some of whom suffered terribly for it. Although he did not go into particulars of the cases he researched, at one point he did look at me and say, "Diana, DW, you know how you've studied the history of Catholicism, and they called some entities either angels or demons? Some of the interactions seem benign and even helpful. Well, the behaviors of some of the things I am talking about would have been called demonic as short as 100 years ago. I thought of his use of the word bedeviled and shuddered." Yep, I mean, that's just the balance, right? There's benign entities and there's not so helpful ones. James reminded me of Tyler. Perhaps Tyler was preternaturally gifted with anomalous cognition. And whoa! Preternaturally, I didn't think that would come up. That's the first time I encountered that word was in this old book I have. Aha! Right here. This book I have called Occult Phenomenon. Now, if you're interested in an early history of poltergeists, ghosts, the unknown, demons, possessions, everything under the sun, this is a great one. Written by a Catholic priest whose job it was to research and either debunk or prove this stuff. He's a PhD dude, scientist man, very good, ends up being a believer. But yeah, super interesting. I first heard about these powers, or not preternaturally, first heard that word in this book. What that means is like our powers before we became so materialistic that we forgot about them. And I don't know, I think that's the best way I could put it. So that's what that means. That's what that word means. I'm just excited to see it. I haven't seen you in a long time, word. Perhaps the founders of the American and Russian space programs were all gifted or cursed with various forms of anomalous cognition. I thought of all the strange anecdotes I had read and heard about the founders of these programs, like Jack Parsons or Konstantin Tsiolkovsky, both of whom believed that non-human intelligences were sending humans symbolic messages, but that only some humans were able to perceive these and translate them into products. And both those men, they are the reasons that we have the space program. If without, I mean, that maybe obviously some other human would have figured it out, but these are the guys who figured it out first. Jack Parsons is the reason that Americans were able to go into space. Even Wernher von Braun says so. He's like the father of NASA. Tsiolkovsky suggested that it was the creative geniuses, scientists, and poets who were able to receive the communications. Quine Zhuxin, a Chinese engineer who helped establish Parsons' Jet Propulsion Laboratory and China's ballistic missile program, also believed in an energetic force that imparted information. Qi, of course, Qi has a long history in Chinese and other Asian religious and philosophical traditions as a sacred life force that can be trapped with the right training. Though not aware of Xian's history of trying to utilize or successfully utilizing Qi to promote science, Tyler certainly adopted his own set of physical training practices to tap into what he thought was a non-human intelligence. I have read several excellent histories of science, but I have yet to read the history of unorthodox science. Annie Jacobson's book, Phenomena, is an excellent overview of some of the most recent unorthodox ways in which science is conducted in the United States. Oh yes, give me the unorthodox ways, baby. She focuses on the U.S. military's experiments into remote viewing, parapsychology, and similar phenomenon. All real. Psychic phenomena is real, folks. It's all real. During the conference break, I thought through the strange tales I learned as a graduate student. There was the case of Srivastava Ramanujan, a poor boy from the Indian province of Tamil Nadu. He had only some elementary training and education in mathematics, yet went on to be one of the most brilliant and innovative mathematicians of the early 20th century. His brilliance was so astonishing that there was a journal devoted to his novel ideas, which are still being worked out and understood. How did a young boy with little training in mathematics end up at Oxford University and become recognized as one of the most brilliant mathematicians in the world? He attributed his brilliance to the Hindu goddess Lakshmi. According to Ramanujan, she whispered mathematical equations in his ear and provided him with specific calculations. This explanation embarrassed his colleagues at Oxford, but he never backed down from his story. To him, it was the truth, because it is the truth. An entity from another time, another space, was talking to him, helping us through him. The young are usually the ones who ask me this question so directly. Wait. Boop, boop, boop. Sorry. I asked James where he thought he himself derived his extraordinary creativity. He seemed pleased that I asked him this question. The young are usually the ones who ask me this question so directly. I am invited all over the world to give lectures about my lab's research. Graduate students are the only ones who have ever asked me how I get my ideas. And truly, it is pretty simple. And somebody needs to study it, document how people do it. I have told them that I think creativity can be trained and that there is a process. Usually, I lay out the most recent problems I need to solve in my head. Sometimes just before bed, he continued, I think of all the possible parts of the problem that I can. What is the question? What would the perfect answer enable? What is the practical answer? What pieces of things could possibly go into making the answer? Then I just ask the subconscious process in my head, which I laughingly refer to as little elves, to work on the problem while I sleep. Oh, that's how you do it, folks. Okay, so there it is. When you go to sleep, think about your problem. Think about all different solutions. Enable your brain. Think about enabling your mind to think about all different solutions and ask your subconscious to do the work for you while you sleep. Our guy James here calls them the little elves. You can call them whatever you want. Little alligators if you want. You can call them elves, but I don't know what they are. I used to think they were just some version of the subconscious process that help you navigate a room of people while talking to a friend or trying to avoid an overly chatty colleague at a party. Call them anything you want. Either I wake up with an answer, or out of the blue it just pops up into my head the next few days. More often, just after waking. And I know I'm not alone in this, but the point is there is a process and I think it can be trained. I'm beginning to wonder if the information comes from somewhere else at times, because for the life of me, I can't figure out from where the inspirations arrive sometimes. I seem to be given part of the puzzle for a problem to which I simply did not previously have access. I wonder sometimes if the ability is somehow related to brain structure and the phenomenon. UFOs. Wow. I was envious. That sounds so easy, I thought. It also sounded like a protocol, somewhat like the one Tyler had told me about. There was always a very interesting process of creativity going on in Tyler and James's cases, and in the cases of people like Ramujan and Kwan. I had read recent research about creativity that showed that the parts of the brain that correlate with identity get shut down when a person is performing a creative act. There it is. Your ego is completely shut out of any creative act. That creative acts are acts of like light. This causes the individual to associate the act with an external agent. Was this happening in the case of Ramujan and others? But if so, what of the physical traces and artifacts of both James and Tyler studied? These seem to solidify the processes for each of these men onto a real external agent, not just an imaginary one. James, can you explain a little more about these elves, or that place where you think this information is derived? I asked. Is this the same place where the quantum information exists? Not sure, he replied. I do know that friends of mine who are scientists often report that they learn things when they sleep, almost as if they travel to some place and come back with information that helps them in their research. Oh, there's this great book I have called The History of Dreaming. We'll have to read this on here too that talks about this. Like, there are times you could travel beyond your bubble. When you dream, you're entering another level of consciousness. You're in like your protected bubble, though, of your dreams, of your memories, of your images. But you can go beyond that and enter a dream world that can be mapped. Dream shaman meet each other in this world. It's where researchers are able to get their information, apparently. Scientists who are able to access it. So we'll check out that book. But that book is just about how people have been doing this for eons, like accessing dreams. Other cultures, ancient cultures, put more importance on dreams. So they all knew how to do it and access their dreams and walk around and shit. I wish it was more focused on here so we can just meet each other in our dreams, you know? Party on. Do whatever we wanted. Anywho. I have no evidence for any specifics except that the ideas do come, and I am not entirely sure how the answers arrive so neatly packaged. So yeah, basically this top level scientist is saying his ideas just show up. He doesn't know where they come from or how they're so neatly packaged, but they show up and then he enacts on them. Then we're getting into the process of translation. Let me see here. The process and translation. Tyler seems to be able to tap into an ocean of creative ideas and bring them to tangible fruition as biotechnologies, but he was never able to explain the process and how it worked. James, on the other hand, is a consummate professor, a teacher. He could explain how he accomplishes the seemingly impossible feats, and he could document and describe the process. His presentation, and when we say the process, that means what we've been talking about this whole book, like by which Tyler talks to non-human intelligences for ideas and how James gets his ideas as well. His presentation laid out a formula for how anomalous cognition could derive from a potentially non-material ethereal information field and then be translated into human hardware. Jacques Vallée had theorized such a direction for research. James, like me, counted Vallée as one of his major influences and mentors. Yeah, he's the godfather of ufology, UFO studies, and belief in the weird. In fact, Jacques was among the serious researchers who reached out to James when he publicly outed himself as interested in the phenomenon. Jacques was not one of the men in black. That was not Jacques' style. Jacques and James formed an instant bond. In James, Jacques found someone capable of understanding his theories and even hammering out their scientific details. In Jacques, James found a mentor in the community of the best researchers of the phenomenon. James once observed that Jacques had achieved his status precisely because he has never concluded that the phenomenon was anything specific. And amen! That's how you know. Like, nobody knows what this shit is. We just know it's there. In fact, Jacques has infuriated most ufologists because he won't fall in line. All Jacques has ever claimed is that the phenomenon seems infinitely variable. Every time you claim it is one thing, he shows you 20 counterexamples. But per Jacques, the overarching message of the phenomenon, UFOs, appears to send is, you are not alone, styled to the level of your cultural understanding and abilities. Jacques, one of the first truly innovative thinkers on the subject, suggests that UFOs, and that's this dude right here, this cutie. Woo! Big boy. Suggests that UFOs might not be an object, but some kind of quote-unquote window into another dimension. The window metaphor is quite interesting, as a window is a physical object, but one through which we see into another place. Could the hardware of James's subjects be like this? Physical, yet somehow not like a conduit, but yet physical, yet somehow like a conduit or window-like? I decided to introduce Tyler and James. They had so much in common. They both felt that they knew the phenomenon was real. Both worked in biotechnology sector, and both were at the top of their fields. James studied the biological hardware of human capabilities for anomalous cognition, whereas Tyler studied the material hardware, the supposed crashed alien spacecraft. I predicted that once they met, they would become fast friends and decide to work together. When I returned home from the conference, I received emails from each of them. One was Tyler's invitation to the site in New Mexico, Roswell, New Mexico. We'll put off Vallée here. James had sent me a few pictures of a fancy charity gala in the Los Angeles Hills, showing him dancing with the beautiful pop star Katy Perry. He was obviously having a wonderful time. Nothing could trump that event, except my invitation to him to attend the site with me in New Mexico. James would have traded 1,000 dances for that simple opportunity. Yeah, amen. To go to the actual site. Ooh, ooh, ooh. Now we arrive at the site. James and the aftermath. I first introduced the two men over email, James and Tyler. I wanted James to come to the site with me, and Tyler, after Tyler decided that James should go to the site, realizing that I wouldn't go there without him, They started an email correspondence that led to a working relationship, just as I had anticipated. Tyler invited James to his home laboratories. At first, they kindly kept me in the correspondence and the phone calls, but soon they were working so closely that I was left behind. By the time we traveled to New Mexico, they were already close associates. Tyler and I arrived in New Mexico before James, so we picked him up at the airport. James's schedule is packed with international travel for talks at universities and other invited visits. Yet I could tell when we picked him up that this was the highlight travel moment of his year. The excitement was evident on his face, and he couldn't suppress his smiles. I was happy too, but not for the same reason. I was still suspicious of the whole thing. My role was to document how the site impacted the belief systems of the scientists. And we're talking about the Roswell crash site from 1947. Unsolved Mysteries has a great episode on it right now on Netflix. I wasn't suspicious of James. As a fellow academic, even in a completely different discipline, I knew that we shared a common set of assumptions and values. We valued transparency, as long as it did not endanger anyone, as well as honesty and peer review. The last is basically a process whereby other smart people can call out our work for errors or stupidity, obliging us to correct it or defend it. These were the ethics we followed. Tyler's profession was so opaque, means like cloudy, to me at this point, that I wasn't sure how to relate to him. I valued James's presence on the trip because I knew that he would be able to help me assess Tyler. That evening, Tyler related a brief history of the site. It was the site of one of the crashes that occurred in New Mexico in 1947. One of the crashes. Okay? So that's the thing. It's just like how we forget that there's two skunk apes. The smaller green chimp variety and the larger Sasquatch variety. There were multiple crashes in Roswell in 1947, or outside of Roswell. There were at least two. So there we go. They went to one of the crash sites. But had been largely forgotten over time. It was not the Roswell event. There were some eyewitnesses. Tyler knew one of them, who had been a child at the time. Tyler told us that the site had a particular feel to it, and that whenever he had traveled there, inevitably people would get into fights, whether due to the intensity of the situation or because of the energy of the site itself. Maybe Tyler was preparing us for this. I wasn't sure. I certainly was not going to fight with him or James. The last time I had fought with anyone, it was with my brother, and I was 12. Wow, good for you. I've never been to the site without feeling the energy, Tyler whispered. Ooh. James and I listened. This wasn't typical field research. The last time it was between the eyewitnesses and the scientists who were took out there, he said. Nobody really knew what it was they were fighting about. They probably didn't even know. They almost came to blows. The place will work on you over time. You will see. I could tell that James was more interested in this than I was, and I soon found out why. Later that night, giving us an overview of his research, James indicated that sometimes the phenomenon, UFOs, acts like a contagious agent. Once it is attached or given to an individual, it would sometimes spread to others who came into contact with that individual. This information, coming from James and not just Tyler, was disconcerting. I prayed that night for protection. From what, I wasn't sure, but I prayed. Always smart. The next day, when we arrived at the site and our blindfolds were removed, James and I were both struck by the stark beauty of the place, made more vivid by the brisk wind that whipped through the desert valley. The site was spread across several acres. James and I took several opportunities to confer while Tyler was busy with something else. We had both been convinced on some level that we were being set up. Later that afternoon, when James found the artifact, and when we say found the artifact, we're talking about a piece of one of the UFOs that crashed outside of Roswell in 1947. My commitment to the theory of a setup was weakened, although it would never completely disappear. James's metal detector had indicated something down between the rocks. He spent some time digging, and even after all that effort, he had to reach far down into the rubble and weeds to retrieve the material. The material looked like a crumpled tin foil that was also a type of fabric. It was clumped with dirt and debris. James's preliminary analysis of the materials months later made it hard to believe that they were made on Earth. In fact, he said he wasn't sure, given their structure, that they could be made anywhere, and certainly not on Earth in 1947. That's how weird they were, and how they defied conventional explanation. They were just anomalous. The ensuing analysis of the material had a significant effect on James and Tyler's belief. Although Tyler was already convinced that the extraterrestrial craft had crash-landed on the site in 1947, James's analysis further justified Tyler's belief. Really, James didn't know what they were, but he knew that they were genuinely anomalous. It didn't matter to James whether a craft had crash-landed at the site or whether Tyler or someone had planted the materials for me and James to find. The artifacts potentially substantiated that something material associated with the phenomenon, UFOs, could be studied or confirmed. James could not understand how on a multi-acre site he had been able to find this structured object. For James, his side interest and hobby now took a very different flavor. Having studied religion for many years, I can offer the following observations. First, here are two eminently credible people, scientists no less, claiming that there are artifacts whose provenance is truly unexplainable. This amounts to having the testimony of credible witnesses, which is pretty much what one finds in the first written documents of Christianity and Buddhism. The Christian Gospels are the testaments and testimonies of credible witnesses, the apostles, which is a Greek word that literally translates to those who are sent, or messengers. Second, the credible witnesses are attesting to something truly unexplainable, truly anomalous. In religious studies, this would be a miracle, either a miraculous object or a miraculous event, such as a healing. Of course, this is not how James or Tyler would speak about the site. It is my assessment. The sites in New Mexico function as sacred sites for this new religion, a religion of the UFO event, and, as I will argue, the religion of technology. They are the places of hierophany, and that's again where religious miracles happen, where non-human beings descend to earth and left us a donation. As James, chuckling, once said, it was something for us to ponder, a window into another reality, a window into another reality, too obscure to fathom now, but evidence of the other. James and people like him will eventually crack its code. I was reminded of the first scene in the film 2001: A Space Odyssey. A group of hominid human ancestors are losing a fight with a rival tribe. After a night's sleep, they wake up to find an anomalous object, a monolith. The monolith and the idea it inspires drives them to develop one of the first tools of war and the catalyst for human evolution and dominance. Arthur C. Clarke's insight is compelling. Not all ideas are benign gifts. What do I think about the artifacts and the site? I believe that James' analysis is correct. They are artifacts and accomplished scientists cannot understand them. Do I believe that they were delivered either intentionally or unintentionally by extraterrestrials or beings from other dimensions? That is, non-human intelligences? This is where the story gets complicated and religious. Suffice it to say, although James and Tyler don't know who or what produced them, their instruments and analyses seem to confirm that the artifacts should not exist. The pure impossibility of their findings, and again, when we say artifacts, we mean pieces of the UFOs they found out in the deserts of Roswell. The pure impossibility of their findings motivates the pursuit of their unorthodox science, which James reminds us is as real as he does in his day job, as real as what he does in his day job. Tyler and James are very comfortable in the gray area of not concluding, of not knowing what it is they found. It is what prevents them from making dogmatic and even ridiculous assertions, amen, such as that these are spacecraft debris from Mars. They both leave open the possibility that the materials are of human origin, perhaps from some military program. Like Socrates, before them, they show that they are wise by admitting that they do not know. That doesn't prevent them from trying to find out, because the truth is probably out there. And it is. So there we go. I mean, that's why we always talk about that too. It's like when we read the wild entity encounters, it's not about why or what. It's just about believing the people who have these encounters, that they encountered something. We might never know the why and the what. But now the myth begins. When I got back to North Carolina, I realized that I had inadvertently walked into some version of the myth, or what has become known as the Roswell event. I was never interested in the topic of UFOs until 2012. And so knew nothing about the conspiracies and theories surrounding Roswell, New Mexico. Beyond what the general public knew, I knew it was a place where UFO enthusiasts believed an alien spacecraft had crashed in 1947. But that was it. Because of my training, I knew that the town functioned as a pilgrimage site for believers and people who wanted to believe. Coincidentally, I am writing this during the annual Roswell UFO Festival. Oh, I gotta go to that. Which is a 4-day festival expected to attract over 50,000 people this year. Its social media pages are filled with pictures from the alien costume pet event. It is a carnival. I was aware that my experience with James and Tyler could lend to support to the myth that alien technology had been found in New Mexico. My question became, how could I write about the two scientists and what they found and believed without inadvertently folding myself into my own story, into the already existing convoluted mind-bending myth of Roswell? The practical answer was that I could not prevent this. So here we are. James said that the parts that came from a crashed non-human vehicle of sorts, then it was a gift or donation for us to figure out. Tyler's interpretation of Roswell was different. Tyler was always fond of saying that the best place to conceal the truth was in a mess of confusion. In other words, a lot of covert things could have happened or could still be happening around Roswell and Area 51, and the UFO narrative was a good cover story for it, or a way to camouflage it. Because of the myth, reasonable people would scoff at any news associated with that location. It was a good way to keep such people from looking into it. Of the books that I had read about the topic, 2 struck me as relevant, but for very different reasons. Additionally, they were completely different sorts of books. Oh, and I read one of these. I read Anne Jacobson's. It was very interesting, very like down the middle look at Area 51. But let's get into it. Hold on here. A long chapter. I'm going to take a break after this, but we're almost through. Annie Jacobson's Area 51, an uncensored history of America's top secret military base, strikes me as probably correct on one count, namely that there are top secret military programs going on in and around the area. Yeah, the rest of it is kind of wild. I'm glad she totally disagrees with it because I did too. Woo! Yeah, DW. She basically explained everything as like all human. There's no alien stuff going on there, and there never was. To me, the most interesting part of her book is talking about how it was originally the Department of Energy that started Area 51. The Department of Energy is the true Department of Secrets. And that's like one thing I love about Stranger Things. They get that dead on. It is the Department of Energy that's really the ones researching all sorts of gnarly stuff, because that is, energy is everything. You know, how we run things, power, electricity. But good. I got to read the next book she talks about because I've never heard of this. But interesting. I'm glad that she feels the same way about Area 51, an uncensored history of America's top secret military base. Tyler's hypothesis that the UFO carnival makes this activity make sense to me. Tyler's hypothesis that the UFO carnival masks this activity makes sense to me. The other book, The Day After Roswell, a former Pentagon official reveals the U.S. government's shocking UFO cover-up by Philip Corso, it suggests a completely different story. Jacobson, and this guy was true, this guy wrote his book revealing everything he knew about Roswell, because he actually was a Pentagon official. He was like turned into a laughingstock. But anywho, Jacobson is a journalist and does not in any way affirm the reality of UFOs or non-human intelligence. Corso, on the other hand, insists that there really was a crash in New Mexico and that it was his job to disseminate the debris and parts from the alien vehicle to private industry, with the story that they were advanced Chinese or Russian technology, and that it was our duty to reverse engineer them to produce whatever technologies we could. Whereas I tended to believe Jacobson's narrative, I felt as if I was living within Corso's. I decided that on some level, both accounts are true. Yeah, it's got to be. There's the surface, and then there's the below. There's the face, then there's the secret. It's like as above, so below. Like we are like that as humans, so of course our governments are like that. It was Tyler who brought me to this conclusion. Oh yes, now Tyler's take on Roswell. Roswell is difficult because not only do humans not understand what is going on within the topic of non-human intelligence, but the topic has been intentionally confused and aggravated by some other forces, human and possibly non-human. Also, two people can have a first-hand credible experience and both of them not agree on what they witnessed. Humans don't like to admit to themselves that they can't figure things out, so we tend to be pretty arrogant about our abilities. But I've noticed over the years that progress is fairly incremental, and many have died not figuring anything out. For me, I have tried to use it mainly as creative inspiration and a force within me that is bigger than myself, which has good intentions and seems to serve the greater good, almost like reading science fiction, except that in the movie business, where a show that is based on a true story seems to carry more energy and attraction to people. Interesting. Hint, hint. Popular sci-fi shows, popular sci-fi movies, is that what he's in? That might have a sprinkle of truth. I get enough of the truth to keep my vision and inspiration going. I've helped a lot of people heal, so I know it's a good force. And again, Tyler, the one invention they talk about that he gave to us and he says was beamed to him, he thinks of it as a memory, and that's how he was able to make it. He figured out a language he could etch onto our bones to make our bones talk to each other and heal themselves. His big victory was, I'm sure there's many more now, but a lady who had bone cancer, the doctor said, you're never going to walk again. She went through Tyler's therapy, had this stuff etched on her bones healed themselves, and she's walking. So it's just everything that we need is already there. It's already within us, It's just interesting. So that's just one thing Tyler has done. So that's what he means when he says he's helped a lot of people heal. This brought me back to two ideas of how the artifacts functioned. I thought of Jacques Vallée and the idea of the UFO not being an object but a window through which we might view other worlds. The myth of the crashed alien craft functioned like this. Perhaps there was another idea, not necessarily incompatible with the window idea. If the legend and the artifacts that inspired it covered up the truth of the development of the secret weapons by the US military, then the legend was also a weapon of information, like Kubrick's monolith. Yep. Information warfare. Now we go from the two scientists she's met, Tyler and James, who believe in the phenomenon, who are in communication with the phenomenon. James being a warrior for humans, being like, yo, we can control this. They're not going to come and terrify us anymore. Tyler being someone who's just in contact with off-world intelligences, and they give him ideas for his scientific experiments, just like the Indian dude we learned about, the mathematician, who got his information from a Hindu goddess. So kind of the same deal, just different cultures. So now we go from Tyler and James to information operations. And when we're talking about information operations, we mean miragemen. We mean befuddlement. There's a great documentary called Miragemen. It's about how the naval intelligence officers actually infiltrate UFO communities and they spread real information, They sandwich it in between fake information. So it's all this crazy, gnarly, real information about aliens, off-world intelligence, but they sandwich it with fake shit. So then it's just confuddled and it can never be trusted. And, you know, it's kind of like, it's like a mind op on all of us. Psyop. But anywho, from the two scientists she knows to information operations. The interesting commonality between James and Tyler is that each had anomalous experiences and each believed he had come across anomalous materials, but refused to draw conclusions about them. Smart. I mean, that's what I don't. I mean, they're way smarter than I would be, but yeah, that's how it's got to be. I feel no conclusions, except that the materials were anomalous and couldn't be explained by the tools they possessed. This is not generally how experiencers proceed. People like answers. Answers come through interpretations. One thing that UFO events and religious experiences have in common is that they don't begin as UFO events or religious experiences. They become UFO events and religious experiences through interpretation. I have not met one experiencer who has seen an anomalous aerial object and immediately thought, that's a UFO. Usually they think of all the things it could be otherwise. A falling star, a satellite, a weird airplane, a secret aircraft, secret military aircraft, a special holographic video produced by tech-savvy neighborhood teenagers. Nobody wants to be known as the person who has seen a UFO. So, if they see something anomalous, they usually choose the least unlikely explanation and leave it at that. The same is true for religious experiences. People who have reported experiences that are ultimately deemed religious have at first been confused by what they see or hear. It is not immediately clear to them that they are having a religious experience. A good example of this is found in the book of Samuel, in the Hebrew Bible or the Old Testament. The young Samuel is asleep one night when he hears his name being called. He wakes up and assumes that it is his teacher Eli. He awakens Eli, who says he did not call the boy. It happens again and again, and Eli says he did not call. When it happens a third time, Eli interprets it as a calling from God and tells Samuel to listen to it and respond. Samuel's experience then becomes an important religious experience that confers upon him the status of a prophet. There is an important, although not absolute, distinction. Again, like just pointing out and proving that these sorts of weird events have happened throughout time. Since ancient times, people have been experiencing this stuff. Just interpreted in different ways. In a religious context, whatever your culture is, you interpret a weird experience in that way. There is an important, doesn't mean it's not true. There is an important, although not absolute, distinction between the event and the subsequent interpretation of it, and how the event becomes embedded within the tradition of meaning. And Tavs has proposed a building block approach to understanding how UFO events become religious events. A variety of disciplines that include cognitive science, sociology, and history can help explain the processes by which people identify an experience as religious or as being related to UFOs. These reveal that human perception is informed by a wide range of things, including what we think we know or should see. From childhood, we are trained on how to see, as well as what not to see. One example in the book, The Invisible Gorilla, and other ways our intuitions deceive us, illustrates this point quite humorously. The authors Christopher Chabris of Harvard University and Daniel Simmons of the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign showed a group of subjects 2 videos of people passing a basketball. They were asked to count the number of passes. In one of the videos, a person was wearing a gorilla suit. In one of the videos, a person wearing a gorilla suit makes an entrance and walks slowly through the basketball players as they pass the ball to one another. Chabris and Simmons found that half the subjects did not notice that an enormous gorilla had passed through the scene. How could this be? How could someone miss seeing a huge gorilla walk slowly through the basketball game, or anywhere for that matter? The cognitive science of media suggests findings that are even more disturbing than missing gorillas in one's midst. Oh no, yeah, we probably miss so much. There's probably so much weird shit going on around us we just don't see. Although if the gorilla were real, or maybe not. What one sees on screen, if it conforms to certain criteria, is interpreted as real, even if it is not real and even if one knows it is not real. Screen images embed themselves in one's brain and memories. They can determine how one views one's past and determine one's future behaviors. This research has disturbing implications with respect to belief. What we see, we tend to believe. The conventional means by which truth is established, that is, by evidence, credible sources, and historically accurate corroborating testimony, is wiped off the plate with one rich, visually stimulating, and emotional image. The creation of a belief system is now much easier to accomplish than it was 2,000 years ago, when people didn't possess smartphones and were not exposed to the ubiquitous screens of a culture that now teach us how to see, what to see, and how to interpret what we see. Jacques Vallée once told me emphatically, trust no one. Do not even trust what you see. Amen, man. Especially now with what AI can do. Woo-wee! Some years earlier, the well-known scholar Donna Haraway had asked me to think about what was happening in my brain and my mind when I looked at images on film, or in the minds of people who witnessed apparitions of the Virgin Mary. What is happening in your mind on their their minds during these events? I hadn't a clue then, but when Jacques told me not to trust what I was seeing, I knew what he meant. From my own research, I knew that digital media and media of all forms are manipulated to produce a specific response that is desired by the producers for purely economic reasons. Everything we consume. I was beginning to research the ways in which virtual and digital media were being used for political purposes under the auspices of information operations. How the military employed media, social media, and all types of electronic media for purposes of national security. All of these media have played major roles in the creation of the global belief in UFOs and extraterrestrials. It is in the world of media that the myth is created and is sustained and, sorry, kitty, proliferates. Ooh-wee! Chapter 2, James, Master of the Multiverse. This talk of social media leads us into chapter 3, which is titled, In the Field. The war is virtual. The blood is real. Welcome to our current state of things. That will be either next week, Thursday or Friday, on the book club, or back on Saturday on the Midnight Book Club. But thank you for joining me for American Cosmic Chapter 2. Holy moly, what a ride. James and his encounters as a child with little beings in his room, leading to his crusade to prove that it's real. And I love his fire, that he doesn't even want to talk to people who don't believe in the phenomena, UFOs. Also eye-opening, learning again about the misinformation campaign about all this, how images and the media is so important, how much it affects us. Very disturbing studies about how what we see affects us, the images we're watching. So, oof. But thank you for joining me for the Midnight Book Club. That is American Cosmic. It is all real. It is all out there. Dimensions, aliens, cryptids, UFOs, ghosties, ghoulies, momos, chupacabras, you name it. It's real and appearing to you or someone else. And if you have a story of the unknown and you want to share it, don't forget. Because I know that, I don't know, but from reading these books, it's hard to find people who believe. But as always,
we're ready to believe you.
And that's the Midnight Book Club.